We think we know history, but the story we tell is full of contradictions. There are things that don't fit, artifacts that shouldn't be there, discoveries that make no sense in the timeline we've been given. I want to go through about 30 of these anomalies, things that defy the mainstream story. By the end, you might see the whole human story differently. There's a device 2,000 years old. It could predict solar eclipses with the precision of a modern computer. And there's a map, a medieval map. It shows a continent that's been buried under ice for millions of years. These aren't just oddities, they're puzzles, profound puzzles, and they're waiting to be solved. So what does it mean for our past when the evidence itself seems out of time? That jarring feeling when something just doesn't fit, that's an anomaly. It's like a puzzle piece that won't go in. It's not just old, it's out of place. An anomaly is an object or a structure or some piece of evidence that seems out of time. Technologically out of place, culturally, geographically, it shouldn't be there. Based on everything we think we know, its existence in that layer of earth or in that ancient text, it's impossible. Now, these aren't always messages from lost civilizations. They're not necessarily visitors from the stars, though people like those ideas. More often, they're red flags. They're the universe telling us our map is wrong. Our timeline has a tear in it. The historian Thomas Kuhn pointed out that all discovery starts with noticing an anomaly. It begins with that cognitive dissonance, that quiet whisper in a museum that says, "This doesn't belong here, and that's why it matters." These uncomfortable pieces of evidence force the difficult questions. The ones we'd rather ignore. Are our dating methods perfectly reliable? Could they be misled? Could human knowledge have advanced in great cycles, peaked, been forgotten, and left only fragments behind? That awareness, that willingness to question the story, that's the first real step. It's the crack where new light gets in. So, with that in mind, let's look at a tangible example. An object so baffling they've called it the world's oldest computer. It was recovered from a Roman shipwreck out in the deep water near a Greek island. For years it just sat in a museum drawer, a corroded piece of bronze and wood, thought to be a basic astrolabe for navigation. Then in the 20th century, a historian named Derek de Solla Price started looking at it closely. And his conclusion was startling. This wasn't a simple tool, it was a machine of incredible complexity. X-rays and later CT scans showed what was inside that corroded shell. More than 30 bronze gears cut with precision. They were arranged with differential gearing, a system we wouldn't see again until the automobile. This was an astronomical computer. You could turn a crank on its side and pointers would move across dials on the face. They would show the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. It could predict solar eclipses, lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. It even tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. Just consider that. This device was made around 150 years before the Common Era, and it could model the moon's irregular, elliptical orbit, a mathematical problem that requires an understanding of celestial mechanics we never thought the ancient world possessed. The craftsmanship is one thing, but the knowledge in those gears is something else. It points to a Hellenistic tradition of science, of mechanics and astronomy that was completely lost. Where are the other machines? Where are the manuals that must have been written to design it? The Antikythera Mechanism is like one surviving page from a whole library that burned down. It's proof that a peak of technology was reached and then forgotten for more than a millennium. It makes you ask a humbling question. If they could build this, what else did they know? And if that knowledge of mechanics and prediction could disappear, what from our own world might someday seem just as impossible? This notion of lost knowledge, of advanced understanding that flickered out, finds a strange parallel, not in a machine but in the stones of the earth. The Baghdad Battery, it's a small clay jar about the size of a fist. Inside there's a copper cylinder, and inside that an iron rod. The top is sealed with asphalt. It was found near Baghdad, and it's old, from maybe 250 years before the Common Era to 250 years after. It looks like a jar for scrolls or herbs, but if you know a little chemistry, the design is familiar. You fill it with an acidic liquid, vinegar maybe, or fruit juice. The iron and the copper, with that liquid between them, they generate a current, a small one. But it's there. It's a primitive battery. We usually say the first battery was made by Volta in 1800, but this object is nearly 2,000 years older. So what was it for? The voltage is low, 1 or 2 volts, not for light, but maybe for something subtle. Some think it was for electroplating, putting a thin layer of gold onto another metal. There are artifacts from that time with fine gold plating. Chemical methods existed, but an electrical method could explain some details. Others think it was for medicine, a kind of early electrotherapy, or for a religious ritual, a small tingle to signify something divine. We might never know the purpose, but the object itself is the point. It shows the principle of electricity from chemistry wasn't just an Enlightenment idea. It was a practical reality explored centuries before. It's like the Antikythera Mechanism, a spark of knowledge that flickered and then was lost. It makes you ask how they thought. What was their relationship to invisible forces? If a battery can be invented, forgotten, and reinvented millennia later, what else was known and then lost? This thread of forgotten technology, it's not just about gears and jars, it's in the stones we walk on, in places where the architecture itself doesn't make sense. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral, Piri Reis, made a world map. He drew it on gazelle skin. He wrote notes in the margins about his sources. He said he used 20 older maps. Some were from the time of Alexander the Great. Some were charts from the Library of Alexandria. The map is intricate, it's beautiful, but the real mystery isn't the known world it shows. It's the part that should have been unknown. It shows the west coast of Africa. It shows the east coast of South America with a precision that was rare for that time. But then, below South America, the map continues. It shows another landmass, a long coastline that curls upward. For a long time, scholars thought it was a fantasy, or a mistake, maybe Tierra del Fuego drawn wrong. Then, in the 20th century, we got new technology. We could see beneath the ice. Seismic surveys, radar, they mapped the bedrock of Antarctica, the continent under miles of ice. When those surveys were done, they made a comparison. The coastline on the Piri Reis Map, its bays, its mountains, its river estuaries, it didn't match the icy shore of Antarctica. It matched the shape of the landmass underneath, the actual continent. It was a map of Antarctica without the ice, a map of the bedrock, and that creates a problem. A chronological impossibility. Geology says Antarctica has been frozen for at least 15 million years. No human in recorded history could have seen that coastline. So how did that information get onto a map in 1513? Piri Reis himself gave the only clue. He said he was working from ancient source maps, which suggests the knowledge was preserved, copied and recopied over centuries, maybe millennia. It survived the burning of the Library of Alexandria. It passed through countless hands until it reached an Ottoman admiral who may not have known what he was drawing. It points to a pre-glacial civilization, an ancient seafaring culture that could map the world with astonishing accuracy, a civilization whose name and story are lost, leaving only this ghostly outline on a piece of skin. If a map can survive from a world before the ice, then other fragments might still be out there, waiting to be recognized. There's a manuscript, It's kept in a vault at Yale. Written in a language no one can read, the Voynich Manuscript, a small book bound in vellum from the early 15th century, carbon dating confirms it. The material is real, but what's inside isn't. The text is in this elegant, flowing script, unknown characters. Not one word has ever been matched to a known language. Living or dead, for over a century, the best codebreakers have tried. Linguists, mathematicians, military cryptographers from both world wars, supercomputers running algorithms. All of it has failed. The cipher, if it is one, stays unbroken. This isn't a forgotten diary. It's a sustained act of communication, meant for someone. Or for no one, and we can't hear it. The mystery just deepens every page. The book is illustrated with paintings, strange botany, plants with twisting roots, bulbous pods. They don't resemble anything in our world. There are astronomical charts, unfamiliar constellations, celestial spheres arranged in ways that contradict medieval models. And then the balneological sections, groups of women, unclothed, immersed in or connected by tubes and baths, filled with a vibrant green fluid. The scenes are intricate, detailed, and completely enigmatic. Are they allegorical, illustrating a biological process we don't understand? The images feel scientific in their precision. But the science is alien. So what is it? The theories are varied, unsatisfying. An elaborate Renaissance hoax, maybe, but the statistical patterns in the text show a complexity consistent with a real language. Not random gibberish, a coded herbal text protecting secret knowledge, possibly. But why invent entirely new plants, a treatise on a lost natural philosophy? A parallel stream of thought that just vanished. That idea feels closest to the unsettling truth. Its existence is a profound anomaly. It contradicts the narrative that medieval Europe's intellectual boundaries were all mapped. Documented, here is a physical object from a known time and place that contains a complete system of thought we can't access. It represents a whole river of inquiry, of observation, of symbolic language that dried up without a trace. The culture that produced it, or the individual mind that conceived it, is speaking in a whisper. A whisper we are physically unable to understand. It stands as a monument not to what we know, but to the vast, silent libraries of human knowledge that have been permanently lost. And if a single book can hold such a complete mystery, then what about the legacy of an entire people, erased from the landscape, but leaving behind impossible questions in stone? In the Ica province of Peru, there's a collection of stones, thousands of them, dark, polished andesite, each one carved with scenes, intricate scenes. Not patterns or symbols, these are detailed illustrations, and they've caused controversy for decades, because here, in clear lines, you see human figures, standing alongside dinosaurs, not as mythical monsters but as animals, interacting with people. Other carvings show something else, what looks like advanced medicine. One shows a figure performing what appears to be a heart transplant, tubes connecting a patient to another person. Another stone shows a cesarean section birth. There are images of humans using telescopes, maps of continents in unfamiliar shapes. The mainstream response has been to call them forgeries, and many were made recently for tourists. But the anomaly comes from the reports of their original discovery. Some stones were allegedly found in sealed, pre-Columbian burial chambers, contexts that would date them to before Spanish contact. If even a small number are authentic, the implications are profound. Modern science places dinosaur extinction and the rise of humanity 60 million years apart. These stones assert a coexistence, a timeline where humans witnessed these ancient giants. But it's not just chronology. The medical and astronomical scenes suggest a knowledge base that feels anachronistic. A heart transplant requires understanding of anatomy, physiology, sterile technique. That seems impossible for an ancient culture, yet the carving is there. It forces questions. Is this a record of lost technology, or is it symbolic, a representation of spiritual practices we misinterpret? Could it be historical fiction, a mythology etched in stone? The stones are a contradiction, either an elaborate hoax or fragments of a narrative so radical it rewrites Earth's story. They suggest a profound error in our timeline, or knowledge preserved from a forgotten epoch. And this idea of an ancient world possessing, then losing, advanced understanding doesn't feel isolated. It echoes elsewhere, not in South American tombs but in the workshops of Renaissance Europe. In objects that seem to defy the laws of material science. The line between geology and technology, it sort of fades out there in the California desert. Back in 1961, 3 guys who collected rocks were up in the Coso Mountains. They found what looked like a regular geode and cracked it open, thinking they'd see crystals inside. But what they found wasn't that. It wasn't a mineral. It looked man-made, a ceramic cylinder, and right through its center, a metal rod. That rod was magnetic. And that whole core was inside this hard, hexagonal casing, like a clay material with what looked like bits of copper in it. All of it was stuck inside a lump of hardened mineral. To them, it was obvious. It looked just like a spark plug or maybe some other electrical part, so they took it to a geologist. The geologist looked at the crust around it, that thick, stony shell that had grown around the object. His report said that shell would have taken a very, very long time to form. His estimate was over 500,000 years. 500,000 years. Our species, Homo sapiens, we weren't around then. The best tools on Earth at that time were just simple stone hand axes. The idea of any machinery, especially something with ceramic and magnetic metal, it's not just unlikely. In our standard history, it's completely impossible. This thing, they called it the Coso Artifact. It's maybe the clearest example of what's called an OOP art. An out-of-place artifact, an object that looks highly technical, but it's found in rock that dates to a time long before any technology like that should exist. It doesn't fit, it makes you ask questions, and each one is bigger than the last. Could it be a piece of machinery from a civilization so old we've lost all trace of it? A civilization that rose and fell in some forgotten age, leaving only this one corroded part behind? Or could it be evidence of something else, a visitor from another time or another place who left a piece of their technology in the earth? Or maybe it points to a problem in our own science. Could our geological dating methods, the ones we use to build the whole story of prehistory, be wrong sometimes? Maybe that stony shell formed much faster than we think, putting the object in a more recent but still unexplained past. And now the artifact is gone. After some study and some news stories, it just disappeared. All we have are photos, the descriptions, and that staggering geological report. Its existence, even just the memory of it, challenges a basic idea. That technology moves in a straight line from simple to complex. The Coso Artifact suggests that line might be a circle. Or that our line is just one of many that have been drawn and then erased over the deep history of the world. If a spark plug can be found in stone that's 500,000 years old, then what does that mean about the other stones? The ones used to build the great monuments, the ones that fit together so perfectly it still confuses us. The Coso Artifact, if it's real, is one kind of precision. But there's another kind, a precision that's built into the land itself, the Great Pyramid. It's not a mystery that it's there, it's a mystery how it's there. The numbers are so well known they almost seem ordinary until you stop and look at them. Then they don't make sense. They don't fit the story we have about that time. Start with the foundation. The base covers 13 acres. That's 7 city blocks, and the whole thing is level, not approximately level. It's level 2 within an inch. Today we'd use lasers for that, digital equipment. They didn't have that. They used water channels, sighting rods, just skill across a bedrock surface. It's a feat that would be hard now. Then the orientation. The four sides face the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. The error is tiny, less than 1/15th of a degree. That's not guessing, that's astronomy. That means years of watching the sky, generations maybe. They weren't just building a tomb, they were tying it to the cosmos. The geometry goes further. The pyramid's perimeter to its height is about 2 pi. Pi, the circle constant, in a square-based pyramid. That means the builders weren't just stoneworkers. They were geometers. They put a relationship between a circle and a square into the stone. Was that on purpose, to put cosmic math into the structure? Or is it a coincidence so exact it's hard to believe? Inside, it continues. In the king's chamber, there's a large box, a sarcophagus, made from one block of granite. Granite is extremely hard. The inside is a perfect rectangle, sharp corners 90 degrees. The surfaces are smooth, flat, polished. The explanation is copper source. Sand, water, but engineers who work with granite have tried to copy it. They find the precision hard to match, even with diamond tools. How do you hollow out a perfect space in solid granite using softer copper? To many, the standard answer feels incomplete. All of this together creates a picture that doesn't fit. The timeline says this was built by an early society. Simple tools, manpower, but the stone tells another story. It suggests a civilization with a deep knowledge system, astronomy precise enough to map stars onto the ground, mathematics that feels advanced, geometry that's elegant, engineering that seems superhuman, which leads to the quiet question over Giza. Could this knowledge be older? Could the pyramid builders have inherited a science that was already ancient? The pyramid has no inscriptions, no manuals. It's a silent teacher. The lessons are in the angles, the alignments, the impossible perfection. It's the ultimate OOP art, not a small object in stone, the stone itself, arranged in a way that hints at a legacy we're still deciphering. And if that legacy existed in Egypt, could it have traveled? Could the same forgotten principles of geometry have been used somewhere else, on the other side of the world? In a city of gold, high in the mountains, Puma, Punku. It's in Bolivia, part of the Tiwanaku complex. They date it to around 500, 600 years after the Common Era. But the stones themselves, they tell a different story. It's a field of shattered megaliths. Some of these blocks, they weigh over 100 tons. They're made of andesite, this very hard volcanic rock, and red sandstone. And they're not just massive, they're perfect. The surfaces are flawlessly flat, sharp edges, perfect 90-degree angles. You see these complex geometric cuts, notches, channels. They look machined. Some stones have these lines of small, drill-like holes perfectly straight. Others are shaped like giant interlocking bricks with tabs and recesses. They fit together with a tolerance of less than a millimeter. That's a level of accuracy you find in a modern machine shop, not from a culture with just stone hammers and copper chisels. The explanation is that the Tiwanaku people did it with abrasives, sand and water, and immense patience, but for engineers, for masons who see it, that strains belief. Working andesite to that smooth, planar finish with simple tools, it's a near impossible task, and the precision of those interlocking joints, it suggests an understanding of anti-seismic architecture. A way to withstand earthquakes. It seems incredibly advanced for its time. So the question is, how was this done? The methods aren't recorded. It's all speculative. The site looks unfinished, or maybe catastrophically destroyed, like the builders were interrupted, which leads to this idea that the knowledge wasn't developed there. It was imported or inherited. Could Puma Punku be the work of a culture with tools or techniques that were later lost? The stones stand as broken testimony. A capability that contradicts the standard timeline for pre-Columbian South America. It suggests a peak of technological skill that flickered and then vanished. A puzzle in rock, and this pattern, it's not unique to one continent. It repeats across the ocean on a remote island. There are hundreds of stone giants, guarding a secret just as profound. The stones at Puma Punku are precise, but for real scale you go to the Bekaa Valley, to Baalbek. The Romans built a huge temple complex there. But the mystery isn't the Roman work, it's what's underneath. The whole complex sits on a platform of colossal stones, stones that make the Roman engineering look small. There's a quarry nearby. In it there's a block they call the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. It's still attached to the bedrock. They estimate its finished weight would be over 1,000 tons. That's 3 jumbo jets, but the real puzzle is already in the wall. The foundation platform has 3 enormous blocks, the trilithon. Each one is about 64 feet long, 14 feet high, 13 feet wide. Each weighs around 800 tons. They were quarried from over half a mile away, moved to the site, then lifted 20 feet into the air, set in a perfectly level, interlocking row. The joints are so tight you can't fit paper between them. The Romans were masters, but they built on top of this. They didn't claim to have built it. Historians say it was an earlier local culture, but the how is the question. How do you quarry a 1,000-ton block from bedrock with Bronze Age tools? How do you move an 800-ton block across that terrain? How do you lift it and align it perfectly in a wall 20 feet high? The usual answers are ramps, ropes, rollers. Thousands of men working for decades, but even with those numbers, the physics are hard to believe. The logistics alone feeding, housing that many people for just a foundation layer, it would be a massive project. But there's no record of it from that time. The craftsmanship shows a knowledge of stone, of engineering, that doesn't quite fit the timeline. It feels like a forgotten chapter. A culture that had the will to move mountains and the skill to fit them together like a puzzle. Baalbek is a monument in layers. The Roman temples are the top layer, the final chapter. They sit on a foundation of silent, impossible stone, laid by hands whose name we don't know. It's that theme again, a legacy of lost grandeur, a capability that appears, does the impossible, and then vanishes from the record, leaving only the work behind for others to find. And sometimes the mystery isn't in the stones you can touch, it's in the empty space they were meant to fill. The Moai stand with their backs to the sea. They're looking inward across the island. We call them the stone heads of Easter Island, but they're not just heads. They're full figures carved down to the torso. Some have these stone topknots made from red rock. The largest one they finished, named Paro, is over 30 feet tall. It weighs about 82 tons. That's like a large truck, and they moved it. They were all born in the quarry, the volcanic crater called Rono Raraku. From that slope, they carved nearly 1,000 statues. Then they transported them to platforms around the coast called Ahu. The distances are huge, up to 11 miles. Over hills, rough ground, and this was done by a Polynesian society. Our records show they had no metal, no wheels, no large animals to pull anything. So the question is how? How did they make them walk? The main theory is that they walked them upright, using ropes to rock the statue side to side, pivoting it on its base, inching it forward in a kind of stumble. It's a powerful image, a giant stone figure marching. Recent experiments say it might be possible, with a skilled crew, the right statue shape. But the experiments also show the difficulty. The base can chip or snap. The process is slow. It demands perfect coordination, moving an 80-ton Moai this way for miles over uneven ground. That's not just an engineering problem. It's an act of faith. It requires social unity. It means a society with extraordinary organization, chiefs or priests who could coordinate labor, feed the workers, maintain a shared vision over generations. That level of cohesion, that technical knowledge, it contradicts the simpler story we often hear about Easter Island. The story of ecological ruin, societal collapse. They cut down all the trees, society fell apart. and they were left with silent stones, but the stones tell a different story. A more complex one. They testify to a culture that was capable, unified, brilliantly adaptive for centuries. Their later hardships research suggests environmental shifts, outside influences. Those don't erase the earlier achievement. They complicate it. The Moai aren't monuments to a failure. They're monuments to a profound success, a sustained success we're still trying to understand. They represent a peak of human endeavor. It seems to rise mysteriously from the timeline we've drawn. And if a society could orchestrate this on a remote island, what other forms of forgotten coordination shaped the ancient world? Maybe in the layout of their cities, in alignments we can only see from above. Deep in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, there's a wall covered in carvings. Scenes of gods' rituals, but one panel doesn't fit. It shows these long, bulb-shaped objects. Inside each one, a snake stretches the whole length, held up by a pillar. The snake's head touches the end of the bulb, and a cable comes from the base, runs to a box, and on that box sits a baboon. To us now, it looks like a light bulb. The object is the bulb, the snake is the filament, the pillar keeps it in place, the cable is the wire, the box is the power source. It feels obvious. You wonder, could this be electrical knowledge? But Egyptology says no. They say it's symbolic. The bulb is a lotus flower. The snake is the god Hera emerging. The pillar is the Jed for stability. The baboon is Thoth, wisdom. Together it's a creation story, the world born from primordial waters. It's myth, not a schematic. So you have this split, a forgotten technology or a metaphor. That's the Dendera anomaly, right at that intersection. The visual case is strong. The parts line up like an early electrical diagram. People ask, why carve such technical details if it's just a flower? The counter is strong too. We're projecting. We see a filament because we know filaments. To the carver, it was always a divine serpent, and that pushes a deeper question: how we understand the past. Our interpretation is a filter. We look at ancient art and we decode it with our own assumptions. When something looks like our technology, we want to say they had it, but maybe the anomaly shows something else, a different kind of knowledge. A symbolic understanding of energy, of illumination, expressed through serpents and lotuses. They understood light as a divine force and carved that idea. Centuries later, we put that force in glass and tungsten, and we saw our invention in their art. So the reliefs don't prove they had electricity. They prove the line between symbol and literal description is thin, blurred by time. They ask us to be humble interpreters, to consider that an ancient mind might capture a principle, the transformation of energy into light, in a form we only recognize through our own inventions. That puzzle gets even sharper when the artifact isn't on a public wall, when it's a private object buried with its secret. In the late 1930s, there was a story. It came from the mountains near Tibet. An archaeologist, Kai Pu-Te, was exploring caves in the Bayan Karaula range, and deep in these caves he found tombs. Neat, orderly tombs. Inside were skeletons. They were small, with large, rounded skulls, and around them there were hundreds of stone discs. Each disc was about a foot across. Each had a hole in the center, and from that center a fine groove spiraled out. But this groove wasn't empty. It was filled with tiny characters, a script. Minuscule and precise, seemingly impossible to carve by an ancient hand. Later, the story grew. It claimed that in 1962, a researcher decoded that script. The translation told a story. It spoke of a people called the Dropa. Their spacecraft had crashed in those mountains long ago. They were stranded. They couldn't repair their ship. They couldn't go home, and these discs, they were their recorded history, a plea from the survivors of the crash, left for a future that might understand. If it were true, the implications are huge. This would be a physical artifact, a recorded narrative, not a suggestive carving, not a puzzling relief. A first-hand account, a data storage device in stone telling a story that rewrites our isolated development on this planet, but mainstream archaeology dismisses it. No reputable institution has examined these discs. No photographs have been verified. The discoverer is obscure. The chain of evidence is murky. Most scholars see it as a 20th century fabrication. A mix of local folklore and the flying saucer fascination of that era. Yet the story persists, and that persistence is its own anomaly. It highlights a deep desire. A human desire for a definitive sign. A single, undeniable object that bridges myth and history, Earth and the cosmos. It represents the ultimate challenge, an artifact that doesn't just suggest advanced knowledge, but proclaims a different origin story. Whether the discs were real or not, the story shows the vacuum that anomalies create. When the official record has gaps, when the timeline feels incomplete, imagination rushes in. It fills the void with narratives that are grand and unprovable. The Dropa Stones, real or imagined, show how one compelling artifact can fuel an entire alternative framework. It challenges not just a date or a technology, but the very nature of who we are, where we come from. It forces a confrontation between the rigorous skepticism of science and the boundless curiosity that makes us look at a strange stone and wonder if it holds a message from the stars. A hammer was found in London, Texas, 1936. A family walking along a creek saw a lump of rock. They cracked it open. Inside was a hammer. A metal head, a wooden handle. It looked like something from the 1800s, something a prospector might have left behind, but it wasn't just lying there. It was completely sealed inside a hard rock shell, a concretion. That's where minerals in water slowly build up around an object and cement it into stone. They had to break that shell to get to the hammer, and the age of that shell is the problem. Geologists said the rock dated to the Cretaceous period. The age of the dinosaurs, over 100 million years ago. If that's right, then this human-made tool was sealed in stone long before our species existed. Before any primate ancestors, the hammerhead is made of very pure iron. The wooden handle is partially carbonized, turned to a kind of coal, which suggests it's very old. But skeptics have an explanation. They say concretions can form quickly, faster than we think, especially in certain mineral-rich water. A hammer from the 1800s could fall into a creek, get coated in dissolved minerals, and harden into a rock casing within decades. Not millennia. They say it's a modern object misinterpreted because of a rapid geological process. For people who study these things, the London hammer creates a conflict. It puts our understanding of human technology directly against our methods for dating the Earth. Which clock do you trust? The geological clock, based on rock layers and radiometric dating, that says the concretion is ancient? Or the historical clock that says this type of ironwork didn't exist 100 million years ago? It's not just about one tool, it's about our assumptions. How firm is the timeline? The hammer forces a confrontation between two solid fields of knowledge. It asks if our dating methods can be misled by local conditions. Or if the story of human progress is missing chapters. It's a small object, but it carries the weight of an epoch, quietly asking which story the Earth is telling. A small wooden bird was buried in a tomb at Saqqara. It waited there for 2,000 years. It was found in 1898, a delicate thing from about 200 BCE. You look at it and it's a bird, maybe a falcon, but then you see the tail. A bird's tail feathers are horizontal for balance, for steering. This tail is vertical. A flat, upright fin, just like the vertical stabilizer on an airplane tail. They call it the Saqqara Bird, about 6 inches long, carved from sycamore wood. To the archaeologists, it was a ceremonial object, a toy, a stylized bird with an artistic choice for a tail, but that vertical fin bothered some people. It wasn't decorative, it looked functional, so they tested it. Aerodynamicists built scale models. They looked at its proportions, its wing shape, its center of gravity. And they found something. The Saqqara Bird is aerodynamically sound. Its wings provide lift. That vertical tail gives lateral stability. It stops the model from rolling in flight. Some replicas, when thrown, can glide a good distance. This shape isn't random. It follows principles of flight. So what does that mean? Did an Egyptian artisan, by chance or by genius, carve a perfect glider? Or is it a model, a scaled-down version of a larger craft? It seems impossible. No records of Egyptian aviation, no myths, no wreckage, but the object is here. A contradiction in wood. It asks a different question, not about powered flight, but about observation. The skies over Egypt are full of birds of prey. Hawks, falcons, they glide on thermals for hours. Did a craftsman study that gliding flight? Did he intuit the need for a vertical surface to control that smooth, banking turn? Did he translate a principle of nature into a carving? Or does it point to a lost thread of experimentation, a forgotten look into air and motion, a knowledge never written down but passed from hand to mind, captured in this one small form? The mainstream view is firm. It's a bird, a toy, a ritual object. The aerodynamics are a happy accident, a coincidence from elegant design. But for those who hold it, who feel its weight and see that fin, the coincidence feels too precise. It sits at that intersection, where ritual symbolism and empirical discovery might have been the same thing. To carve a bird that could actually fly, even as a model, might have been the highest tribute to the sky gods. The Saqqara Bird doesn't ask us to believe in ancient airplanes. It asks us to consider the depth of ancient observation, and to wonder what other principles of the natural world they understood well enough to shape in wood and stone. The ground in southern Peru, this desert floor, it's covered in these shallow paths, just scraped clear. Dark stones moved aside to show lighter earth underneath. But from above, it's something else entirely. You see a hummingbird, wingspan over 300 feet, a spider, legs detailed, a monkey with a coiled tail. A whale, a tree. These are the Nazca Lines, made between about 500 BCE and 500 CE, and you can only really see them from the air. The common explanation ties to ritual. The Nazca lived in one of the driest places. Survival depended on water, on the sky, on cycles, so the lines might have been sacred pathways for ceremonies to call for rain. Or maybe an astronomical calendar lining up with solstices or stars. How they made them seem simple enough, stakes and ropes, scaling up smaller designs. Removing the dark surface stones to make lines that have lasted. But the thing is the precision. Straight lines that run for miles without wavering. Curves on the animal figures that are smooth, perfectly proportioned. That kind of accuracy over such distance suggests a knowledge of surveying, a skill we don't usually link to that time in that place. And then there's the main question. Why would a people over generations put that much work into creating art they could never see? They couldn't fly. The full form of the hummingbird, the complexity of the spider, those visions were hidden from them. That gap has led to other theories. Maybe they had primitive hot air balloons for planning, for ritual views, or maybe the lines were markers, messages for beings who could see from above. But those ideas might miss something deeper. The Nazca worldview might have been different, not centered on visual spectacle for people. The act of creation itself might have been the point. The process, walking the lines, moving stones together, that could have been a prayer made physical. The glyph itself, invisible to them but visible to the gods in the sky, was an offering. Etched into the earth, so the lines aren't just a mystery of how, they're a mystery of meaning. They don't fit our story of cultural progress, where art and science move toward realism and utility. Here was a civilization that used its skill, its organization, for something with no practical return we can measure. Their monument wasn't a pyramid reaching up. It was a drawing laid flat for the sky to see. It makes you think that human achievement can be in faith and symbol, not just engineering. That a culture's legacy might be a message whose full beauty they left entirely to the horizon. There are these huge drawings in the desert. They make us question what purpose means, but there's another place buried for thousands of years that questions something even bigger, the order of human history itself. In southeastern Turkey, in the rolling hills, a shepherd's sheep wandered off that led to a find. It broke a core assumption, Göbekli Tepe. The name means Potbelly Hill. And for a long time, that's all anyone thought it was. Just a hill, but under that mound was something monumental. Archaeologists found circular enclosures, each one defined by these massive T-shaped pillars made of limestone. The pillars are enormous, some weigh more than 10 tons, and they aren't crude. They were quarried expertly, moved and set upright, but the real wonder is on their surfaces. They're covered in carvings, intricate, high-relief work. A whole menagerie of ancient animals, foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions, lions, all rendered with a startling sophistication. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. This was clearly a place of ritual, a sanctuary. The shock came from the dates. Radiocarbon dating on the construction material goes to around 9,600 BC. That's over 11,500 years old. This structure is more than 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid. That date is the anomaly. It rewrites the story. According to the mainstream timeline, this period was the tail end of the last ice age. Humanity, we were told, lived in small nomadic bands. Hunter-gatherers, lives consumed by the daily struggle. We had simple tools, temporary camps. No concept of large-scale society. We certainly didn't have the organization, the manpower, or the artistic vision to conceive of a place like this, let alone build it. The site forces a confrontation with that. To build this required a coordinated labor force. It required planners, skilled stoneworkers, a social hierarchy capable of directing a project over generations. It required a shared, complex symbolic language. Those carvings weren't doodles. They communicated a cosmology, a system of beliefs. All of this points to a level of social complexity that textbooks said was impossible for another 5,000 years. The deepest implication upends a foundational principle. For over a century, a core tenet has been that agriculture came first. The story went like this: humans learned to farm. That created a food surplus. The surplus let people settle. Settlement led to population growth, social stratification, specialized jobs, and finally, the leisure and resources to build monuments and develop religion. Göbekli Tepe turns that sequence on its head. Here we have the grandest monument we know from its era, built by people who, the evidence suggests, were still hunter-gatherers. They built the temple first, which suggests the drive to come together for a shared spiritual purpose. The need to build a communal sanctuary may have been the catalyst. The cooperation required to build Göbekli Tepe might have created the social framework, a framework that later made settling down and farming not just possible, but necessary. To feed the gatherings, the sanctuary may have invented the society, not the other way around. The hill isn't a tomb, it isn't a palace, it's a temple. And its silent, carved pillars stand as a testament to a forgotten dawn, where perhaps the first seeds of civilization weren't sown in fields of grain, but in circles of stone. Built by people we are only just beginning to understand. The desert at Göbekli Tepe was once green, but there's another desert. In Algeria, the Tassili-en-Naja Plateau rises like a fortress. Its name means plateau of the rivers. That's a memory, a reminder this wasn't always desert. The rock is a canvas. People left a record here over thousands of years. A library, thousands of paintings and engravings, from maybe 6,000 years before the Common Era up to the early centuries of the Common Era. They show a world changing. The early scenes are lush, herds of cattle, giraffes, elephants, hippos, animals that need water, grassland, people hunting, dancing, living in communities. Then, over millennia, the paintings change, the green fades, the animals become desert creatures, hardy ones. It's a visual history, a climate catastrophe in ochre and charcoal. But in this vast narrative, there are panels that stop you, figures that don't fit. They're larger than the human forms around them. Their bodies are simple, rounded. But their heads aren't human. They're large, perfect circles, spheres, and sometimes these spheres have lines radiating from them, or a single line connecting the head to the body, like a hose. Or a cord. Some look like they're wearing a one-piece suit, with bands at the joints. To a modern eye, it's jarring. They look like divers or astronauts. They are called the round-head figures. Mainstream archaeology has an interpretation. These are likely ritualistic, shamanic. The large circular heads could symbolize a spiritual transformation, a connection to the divine. The suits might be ceremonial garments, feathers, woven fiber for dances or rites. The lines could be rays of power, spiritual energy from an altered state. In this view, the paintings aren't literal. They're symbolic maps, a spiritual journey, yet the anomaly persists. The visual similarity to modern pressure suits is striking. It's fueled speculation for decades. Could these be records of something else, a literal depiction of beings that visited, wearing technology the artists had no words for, so they drew what they saw? This is the core of the ambiguity. It lives in the space between the artist's intent and our perception. We're separated by 8,000 years of cultural evolution. We look at a round head with lines and see a helmet with antennae. Did the artist see a shaman crowned with the sun? We see a jointed suit. Did they see a body painted for a sacred dance? The paintings challenge us to confront our own biases. We are children of the space age. It's our dominant mythology. So when we look into the deep past, we're prone to see reflections of our own technological wonders. The tassely figures become a Rorschach test. They tell us as much about our desires, the longing for contact, for a grander narrative, as they might about the past itself. This is the delicate work. It requires holding two possibilities without forcing an answer. They could be profound spiritual art, capturing the intangible in symbolic form. Or in a universe of infinite possibility, they could be something else entirely. The truth may be forever out of reach, lost with the artists who stood before those cliffs. What remains is the power of the question. It lingers in the dry desert air, a whisper from a time when the rivers still flowed, asking us how we see and what we believe we are seeing. In 1957, archaeologists were working at a Native American site in Maine, and they found something, a silver coin. A penny. It was identified as Norse from the reign of King Olaf Kyrre. That's between 1067 and 1093. The site itself was from the 12th century. So that's the Maine Penny. We know the Norse were in North America. There's Elant's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, a small settlement from around the year 1000. A brief foothold. The story is they came and then they left. But this coin was found hundreds of miles south of there, in Maine. It was found among the artifacts of a Native American community. So how did it get there? One explanation is trade. Through indigenous trade networks, a Norse trader might have used it on the coast, and then from hand to hand over years it traveled inland to Maine. In that view, the coin isn't proof of Vikings in Maine. It's proof of the reach of pre-Columbian trade. An object moving farther than the people who made it. But there's another possibility. It could point to more extensive Norse travel, explorations further down the coast, a voyage where a coin was left or traded directly. The site date suggests this could have been a century after the main Vinland expeditions. Not a single moment of contact, but a longer, more intermittent thread. The coin is an anomaly. It's not a sword, it's a whisper. It doesn't demand we believe in Viking colonies. It just suggests the story is messier, more interconnected. The Atlantic for 500 years after the Norse might not have been an absolute barrier. It may have been a space of occasional, tentative meetings, where a silver penny could cross worlds and end up in the earth waiting. A single object can hold the weight of an entire ocean. Archaeologists were working in central Mexico under the floors of a pre-Columbian pyramid. And they found something, a small terracotta head about the size of a fist, but the features were clear, a straight, strong nose, a trimmed, curly beard. The hair was a cap of tight curls. This wasn't Mesoamerican style. It looked in every detail like a piece of Roman art from the classical period. They named it the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca Head. It was found as a burial offering. It was sealed under 3 intact floors of a pyramid at Calixtlahuaca. The context was secure. The layers dated it to before 1510. That's before any Spanish arrival. Later, experts did a stylistic analysis. They said it could indeed be Roman, maybe from the 2nd or 3rd century. The implications of that are huge. It would mean this object crossed the Atlantic over 1,000 years before Columbus, a physical piece of Rome ending up in a tomb in Mexico. So the immediate question is how? Could a Roman ship blown off course have reached the Americas? Could there have been a shipwreck with survivors or trade goods washing ashore? Or does it point to something longer, a sustained contact, a thread completely forgotten, a lost trade route where a single figurine traveled farther than any legion ever marched? Skeptics have another explanation. They say it was a later introduction. A Spanish colonist or a priest in the 16th century might have brought this Roman curiosity from Europe. Then, through some accident or ritual, it worked its way down into the older layers, contaminating the context. It's a possibility archaeologists always have to consider. Objects in the ground can move, they can deceive, yet the find is still tantalizing. It sits right at the center of a big historical debate. Were the oceans absolute barriers until 1492? Or were they highways traveled occasionally by the bold or the unlucky, leaving only the faintest traces? This small head with its serene, foreign face argues for the second idea. It suggests our ancestors were more connected. Their world was perhaps smaller, more navigable than the rigid timelines in our textbooks say. It's a whisper of contact. A silent ambassador from one great civilization to another, waiting centuries for its message to be heard. And if one head could make that journey, what else traveled with it? Ideas, seeds, stories that blended into the fabric of a new world, leaving only this hardened clay as a clue. The Kingoodie Quarry in Scotland. It cuts into Devonian rock. In 1844, a workman was splitting a large block of sandstone. The block came apart, and inside it he saw something, a metal object embedded in the solid stone. It was a hammerhead. The workman was certain the block had been solid, no cracks, no fissures. The hammer had been there when the stone formed. The hammerhead was made of an unusual iron alloy. And the rock around it was dated to about 400 million years old. That's the Kingoodie Hammer. It has a sibling, the London Hammer from Texas. Another tool in impossible stone. It's the same contradiction. The Devonian period is called the Age of Fishes. Life was just starting to creep onto land. The first primitive forests, no humans, no primates, not even dinosaurs. According to everything we know, intelligent life capable of forging metal wouldn't appear for another 399 million years. But here is the hammer, a crafted object inside that ancient rock. The immediate response from science is to question the context. Could the workman have been mistaken? Could there have been a hidden fissure sealed by mineralization, letting a more recent hammer become lodged? Could the dating be wrong? These are valid questions. Skepticism is the first tool, but if the account is accurate, the anomaly stands. It becomes a classic OOP art, an out-of-place artifact, the most direct kind. It doesn't just suggest a lost civilization from 10,000 years ago. It points to a presence in a time frame that feels mythological, 400 million years. A span so vast it defies our everyday understanding. This forces a consideration. It asks us to examine our own methods. Is our understanding of how rock forms, how minerals encase objects, truly complete? Could certain conditions cause stone to form with incredible speed around an object, making it appear ancient? Or does it point the other way? Could our geological timelines contain errors? Could they compress or expand deep time in ways we haven't realized? Beyond the scientific puzzle, the hammer invites a shift. It asks us to sit with an idea. What if the story of intelligence on this planet is not a single, unbroken line from ape to human? What if it's a series of flickers, a possibility that rises, endures, and is utterly erased by the slow, grinding work of geological ages? The Kingoodie Hammer, if genuine, would be a relic from one of those forgotten flickers, a whisper from a world so old that mountains have risen and eroded away since it was made. It challenges not just our history but our place in it. We think of ourselves as the first, the only ones to shape metal, to build, to record. But what if we are simply the latest? What if the hammer is a message from a deep past that holds no memory of us, just as our future may hold no memory of whatever comes next? It's a quiet, metallic question mark buried in Scottish stone, asking us to think in scales of time we can scarcely comprehend. And if a single hammer can endure such ages, what else might be waiting, still encased, still silent, in the bedrock beneath our feet? In 1974, on the banks of the Mureș River in Romania, construction workers were digging. They went deep, about 35 feet down, and in a layer of sand and gravel they found bones. Mastodon bones, an ancient elephant. Alongside those bones they found 3 objects. 2 were more bones, but the third object was different. It was a wedge of metal. About 8 by 5 inches, it had a hole like it was drilled through one end. It was heavy. They sent it for analysis. The results didn't make sense. The metal was an alloy, mostly aluminum, about 90%, with some copper, zinc, silicon. That mixture doesn't occur naturally. Aluminum has to be made. You have to extract it from ore using electrolysis. That process wasn't invented until 1825. So for this to exist, someone in the distant past would have needed that technology, which is supposed to be impossible, and its condition added to the puzzle. The wedge was covered in a thick crust, an oxide layer. Specialists looked at it and said that crust was consistent with something thousands of years old. Then there was the context. It was found in the same layer as the mastodon bones, under 35 feet of sediment. Mastodons went extinct around 11,000 years ago. The implication was that the wedge could be that old too, a piece of advanced metal from a time of stone tools. Skeptics have an answer. They say it could be a piece of modern machinery, a fragment from an excavator bucket. Those buckets use hardened aluminum alloys. It could have broken off and fallen into the pit during the digging, mixed in with the older material, and that thick oxide layer, they argue, could form in just decades. If the conditions are damp and mineral-rich, it doesn't need millennia. But the workers insisted. They said the objects came from a sealed layer, undisturbed, deep down. If that's accurate, then the anomaly stands. It's called the Aiud Wedge. And it forces 2 different stories together. One story is about a forgotten chapter, a flicker of metallurgical knowledge long before its time. The other story is about a mistake. A modern intrusion that got misinterpreted. What's compelling is its simplicity. It's not a complex machine. It's just a chunk of metal. That ordinariness is what makes it extraordinary. If it's genuine, it doesn't rewrite a grand narrative. It rewrites a quiet, technical one. It suggests the discovery of aluminum in the 19th century wasn't an invention. It was a reinvention, a lost technique, buried with the mastodons waiting in the riverbank. It makes you wonder how many other fundamental discoveries are actually rediscoveries. With the original innovators just lost to the deep silt of time. The stone spheres are in Costa Rica, in the river deltas. They're called Las Bolas. Some are huge, as tall as a person, weighing tons. They're perfectly round and the surfaces are smooth, unnaturally smooth. They sit there in the jungle, which is all vines and chaos, and then there's this sphere. A perfect geometric shape. It feels out of place, not like it's from the wrong time, but from a different kind of space altogether. They were made by the Dikwis culture. Starting around 300 BC, the material is hard stone gabbro, limestone, sandstone, to shape that with just other stones as tools. The method is called pecking and grinding. You chip away at the block with a hammerstone, then grind it with sand and water. It would have taken generations theoretically, but the results, they're not just theoretical. They're almost impossible. The precision is measured in millimeters. On the biggest ones, over 6 feet across, the roundness is so exact that laser scans show deviations smaller than a hair. That consistency across hundreds of spheres means it wasn't just skilled labor. It was a standardized knowledge, a technique that was passed down. Their purpose, though, that's the mystery. Many were found in lines, in geometric patterns near where chiefs lived. So the mainstream view is they were symbols of power, of status. Some think they had astronomical alignments. Others say they marked territory or sacred paths, but there's no written record, no oral history from the people who made them. The spheres are silent. Their meaning is locked inside the form, and that silence makes them an anomaly. In Mesoamerica, you have pyramids, plazas, carvings. Here, you just have spheres. A civilization that put immense effort not into building upward, but into perfecting this one shape on the ground. It's a different priority, a different expression of value. Then there's the question of movement. How do you transport a 16-ton sphere from a quarry through rainforest across rivers? The answer is probably log rollers, ropes, huge coordinated teams. But to move so many of them without damaging those perfect surfaces, that's a logistical feat. It points to a highly organized society, one that could marshal labor for a project that blended art, science, and probably something spiritual. The spheres don't fit a simple story. They stand apart. They remind you that a culture's sophistication can focus on a single, profound expression, one we can see and measure. But the inner language of it, we might never hear that. They're not monuments to a king or a god. They're monuments to an idea, the idea of a perfect sphere carved patiently from an imperfect world. That drive to find a perfect form like a sphere, it's a powerful human impulse. But what if the form wasn't just geometric? What if it was biological? In Colombia, there's an object, they call it the genetic disc. It's a circle of dark stone about the size of a large dinner plate. Across its surface, carved in crisp relief, are images. They look like a biology textbook. You see sperm cells with their distinct heads and tails. You see an ovum, a human egg. There are scenes that show cellular division, a single cell splitting into two. And most strikingly, depictions of a developing fetus, various stages from a small cluster to a recognizable human form. The disc is often linked to the Quimbaya culture. They lived in that region centuries ago, known for their gold work, but the provenance is murky, the documented history of where it was found and by whom. It didn't come from a professional archaeological dig. its surface through private channels that casts a long shadow of doubt. The imagery is the core of the anomaly. To carve these things, the artist would need to know they exist. Sperm and eggs are microscopic. The details of embryonic development weren't mapped with accuracy until powerful microscopes. Centuries after the Quimbaya, for a pre-Columbian artisan to depict these processes with such specificity, they'd need a knowledge base that, according to our timeline, couldn't exist. It feels like a modern medical diagram stamped onto ancient stone. This puts the disc in the center of the fiercest debate, the line between a groundbreaking discovery and an ingenious forgery. Skeptics argue it's a compelling, modern hoax, created perhaps in the 20th century when public understanding of basic biology was widespread. A forger could have taken a genuine ancient stone object and added these anachronistic carvings, or crafted the entire piece to sell a story. Without a clear archaeological context, the burden of proof is immense. The disc becomes a story of what we want to believe, not what we can prove. Yet, for those who study it, the craftsmanship has a haunting consistency. The style of the carving, the wear patterns on the stone, some argue they feel authentic. Not modern, this is where the battle is fought, not with grand theories but with quiet tools, geology and art history. A microscope might examine the tool marks within the carvings, looking for signs of modern metal implements. Geologists might analyze the patina, the natural film that forms on stone over centuries, to see if it exists inside the engraved lines. These are the painstaking tests. Trying to separate truth from tale, the genetic disc demonstrates the tightrope of alternative history, the emotional and intellectual tightrope. It represents the deepest desire to find a single, undeniable object that rewrites the story of human knowledge, and it represents the greatest peril, the vulnerability of that desire to deception. Whether it's ultimately proven real or fake, its legacy is the same. It forces a confrontation with our own credulity. It asks how we vet the extraordinary. What standards of evidence we require before we let an object break our timeline. In the silent language of its carved cells, it poses one relentless question. Are we looking at a forgotten science or a mirror of our own hopes? There's a silence on the ocean floor, a world apart, but off Yonaguni Island that silence breaks. There's a structure there. A diver found it in 1986, a massive terraced rock formation just below the waves. From the surface, it looks like a drowned city. You see flat faces meeting at sharp 90-degree angles, steps like a grand staircase, pillars what look like wide carved channels, and on one wall reliefs. Some see a turtle there, a human face. The scale is monumental, like a pyramid laid on its side taken by the sea. Geologists have a clear answer: the rock is sandstone. They point to something called sheet jointing. Tectonic stress fractures the rock along parallel planes, and then the powerful tidal currents in that area. They erode those fractures. They carve the steps, the flat surfaces, the channels. In their view, it's a spectacular sculpture, but a natural one, carved by the patient, immense forces of the earth. But when you swim around it, that explanation can feel thin. The regularity is staggering. The corners are too sharp. The tiers are too even. The placement of the pillars, the alignment of the features. It feels like a pattern, the turtle carving, its clear outline, what looks like a carved eye. It feels intentional. It's the accumulation, all these geometric shapes in one place. That challenges a purely random origin. That's the heart of the debate. Yonaguni sits on that blurred line between nature's artistry and human intention. If it's natural, it's one of the most breathtaking examples of geological architecture on the planet. If it's artificial, or even a natural formation that was later modified by people, the implications are profound. The site is in shallow water, shallow enough that it would have been above sea level during the last ice age. when ocean levels were much lower. That period ended roughly 12,000 years ago. So if people shaped this, they did it then, in a time when our history books say humans were simple hunter-gatherers, incapable of such monumental stonework. It would suggest a sophisticated, seafaring culture in the Pacific, a civilization that flourished on what is now the continental shelf, and then was swallowed by the rising seas as the glaciers melted. Yonaguni doesn't offer easy answers. It offers a choice between two grand narratives. One is a story of Earth's raw, creative power. The other is a story of human ambition, swallowed by the planet's changing climate. Both stories speak to a deep past, an immense scale. Whether we're seeing the hand of geology or the hand of a forgotten people, the monument stands. A haunting reminder, our world has known many shapes, and many of its greatest wonders may still be hidden, not in distant jungles or beneath desert sands, but in the quiet, sunken cathedrals of the sea. Olof Oman was clearing land in Minnesota. He was a farmer, Swedish roots. This was 1898. His plow hit something hard, a slab of stone, grey-wacky, about 200 pounds. He pulled it up, and on the face there were markings, carved lines. They were runes, the Old Norse alphabet. He couldn't read them, but he knew what they were. The stone went to scholars. The translation told a story. A party of 8 Goths or Swedes and 22 Norwegians, on an exploration journey from Vinland far to the west. The inscription had a date, the year 1362. And it ended on a somber note, 10 men red with blood and dead, a tragedy carved in stone in the middle of North America, over a century before Columbus. The academic world dismissed it quickly. This was the Kensington Runestone. To most historians, to linguists, it was an obvious hoax. The runes, they said, were a mix from different periods. The language had grammatical quirks that didn't fit 14th century Old Norse. Some argued the carving showed signs of modern tools, not centuries of wear. The story itself felt too perfect. A lone Scandinavian immigrant finds a relic of his ancestors on his new homestead. The motive for a forgery seemed clear. A desire to plant a deep, noble root in the new soil of America. But the stone never went away. Its defenders point to other evidence. Geologists who looked at the inscription noted deep weathering in the grooves. A kind of weathering, they argued, that would take many centuries to form, not a few decades. They point to records like the Icelandic sagas that mention later expeditions from Greenland. Could a group have traveled inland, up the rivers, into the heart of the continent? It's not impossible. The stone was found near a network of waterways, a natural highway. So the stone sits at an impasse, a conflict not just of evidence but of belief. On one side, the rigorous consensus of academia, protecting the historical narrative from forgery, from wishful thinking. On the other, a persistent counter-narrative, fueled by local pride and a sense that the official story might have gaps. The Kensington Runestone is more than a rock. It's a cultural touchstone. It reflects a deep human desire, the desire to connect, to find our story written into the landscape long before we arrived. To feel that the new world has an old, familiar heart. Whether it's a clever 19th century creation or a genuine artifact from the 14th, its power is the same. It shows how an anomaly can capture the imagination and refuse to be buried. It becomes a mirror. We look at the weathered runes and we don't just see letters. We see a question about who gets to write history and a longing for a past that reaches out across the ocean and the years to meet us where we stand. A story can be as powerful as any artifact. There's a cave system in the jungles of eastern Ecuador, Cueva de los Teos. In 1976, an explorer named Juan Morix made a claim. He said he'd found something in those caves, not just caverns. He said he found a library, a huge chamber with thousands of large books or plates made of metal. each one inscribed with strange glyphs, a script no modern scholar could recognize. He described smooth, polished metal pages bound together. He believed it was preserved knowledge from a forgotten civilization. Later, the author Erich von Däniken amplified the story. It captured people's imagination. This was the ultimate physical anomaly. Not a single tool, an entire archive, a repository that, if it was real, could answer every question about lost epochs. It promised a literal key to rewriting history. The response from scientists and explorers was skeptical. There were mounted expeditions, a notable one with British and Ecuadorian teams. They went deep into the treacherous caves. They documented impressive geology, ancient human remains, artifacts from indigenous cultures, but they found no metallic library, no gleaming shelves of inscribed plates. The consensus formed. Morix's account was likely a confabulation, a mix of local legend, misunderstood natural formations, and maybe a genuine desire to find something monumental. The tale became a modern myth, but its persistence is the real anomaly. Why does it endure? It endures because it's a perfect archetype. The idea of a hidden library touches a profound human nerve. We are storytellers, we fear lost stories, we are knowledge builders, we're terrified of the great gaps in our record. The metallic library isn't just a place. It's a symbol. It embodies a hope that somewhere locked away is a complete backup of our past, a direct line to the truth, untouched by the erosion of time, untouched by the distortions of translation. Its power lies in its elusiveness. Because it remains unfound, it can forever hold the promise of ultimate revelation. This legend shows a delicate boundary. In the search for anomalies, the line between rigorous investigation and the pull of aspiration. When the desire to fill history's gaps becomes strong enough, it can shape what we see, or what we believe we've found. The Cave of the Teos story shows how an anomaly can evolve, from a reported discovery into a cultural artifact itself. A modern legend, one that fuels further exploration, even against contrary evidence. It teaches a cautious lesson. The quest to rewrite the timeline has to be grounded in evidence. But it's forever accompanied by a powerful whisper, the haunting whisper of what might be waiting in the next cave, the next trench, the next layer of earth. The search continues, not just for objects, but for the resolution to a story we've already begun to tell ourselves. On the ceiling of the Temple of Seti I, there's a kind of riddle. A small group of hieroglyphs. To us now, the shapes are obvious. You see a helicopter, a cockpit, a tail rotor. Next to that, something like a submarine. Or maybe a hovercraft, then further along, a jet plane, and something like a flying wing, all of it carved in stone over 3,000 years ago. So the immediate thought is, could this be a record? Could it be showing advanced technology, something the Egyptians saw? Egyptologists have an answer for this. It's not a record of machines, it's a record of time. The temple was built by Seti I. His son, Ramesses II, added to it later, and in Egypt it was common to plaster over old carvings to update them. Here they plastered over a ceiling panel that had Seti's names and titles. They carved Ramesses' names into that new plaster. Then centuries pass, that plaster falls away. But it doesn't fall away cleanly. It chips, it erodes in a specific way. What's left is emerging. A palimpsest, fragments of the old Seti inscription and the newer Ramesses inscription are both visible now. Overlapping lines, the curve of one glyph, the wing of another, they combine by accident. They create these new, modern-looking shapes. The helicopter is a coincidence of stone and erosion. A collision of two historical texts. That explanation fits. It matches Egyptian building practices, but the anomaly persists, not in the stone, but in how we see it. The coincidence is so visually perfect, so detailed, it feels intentional. It's become an internet legend, a single photo that seems to break the historical timeline. This has a name, pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random things, faces in clouds, animals in rocks, and here, a helicopter in eroded hieroglyphs. The Abydos relief is a perfect case. It sits between a rational archaeological explanation and a human desire, the desire to find confirmation, to look into the deep past and see a reflection of our own world. It shows how our hopes, our own context, shape what we think we're seeing. We're from the aviation age, so we see aircraft. An Egyptian priest from that temple would look up and see only the sacred names of his kings. Perfectly clear, that doesn't take away from it, it adds to it. The real lesson isn't about ancient astronauts, it's about us, the filters we use when we look at history. How easily we project our own story onto the silent past. The stone itself is neutral. It holds the names of 2 pharaohs. We're the ones who supply the helicopter. The jet, the mystery, we complete the picture with our own questions. So the anomaly isn't in the temple ceiling. It's in the space between the carved lines and the modern eye. A space filled with wonder and speculation, and that urge to connect across the millennia. The seafloor has its own kind of strange geometry. Back in 2011, a Swedish team was out with sonar scanning the Baltic Sea bottom. And their equipment painted this shape that didn't make any sense, a perfect circle 60 meters across. Inside that circle, the sonar showed sharp angles, straight lines. Features that looked almost architectural, staircases, ramps, a central pillar. To a lot of people who saw the image, the silhouette was uncanny. It looked like the Millennium Falcon just sitting there in the deep. They called it the Baltic Sea Anomaly. The immediate explanation from science was geological, a glacial moraine, something left behind by the ice sheets from the last ice age. Natural processes can create surprisingly regular shapes. Basalt, mineral deposits, even old shipwrecks covered in mussels. They can trick sonar into seeing structure. That was the logical answer, a weird but natural rock formation. But then the story got more complicated. Divers who went down there reported strange things. Their electrical equipment would fail, cameras, satellite phones, everything would malfunction right above the object and then start working again once they moved away. They retrieved a sample from the anomaly. Analysis suggested it contained metals, iron, manganese, titanium, in combinations and forms that didn't look like a simple glacial rock. It looked more like an engineered alloy that pushed other theories forward. Could it be a forgotten piece of World War II tech, a secret anti-submarine device, or a sunken German listening post now all encrusted? Or, given the location and the electrical interference, something even more unconventional? The Baltic Sea Anomaly is a modern puzzle. It wasn't found by a farmer plowing a field. It was discovered with 21st century technology in a place we've barely explored, the deep sea floor. It shows that finding contradictions isn't over. The map isn't finished. New tools are revealing new mysteries right now. It sits in that space between a clear natural explanation and a set of odd details that don't quite fit. It might stay an enigma, a sonar ghost, a reminder that the unknown isn't just behind us in time. It's also beneath us in the dark water, waiting, the weight of a single human will. You can measure it in pages. There was a monastery in Bohemia, early 13th century. A monk began a task. He started to write a book, not just any book. This would become the largest medieval manuscript to survive, the Codex Gigas, the giant book, or more famously, the Devil's Bible. It weighs about 165 pounds. 3 feet tall, nearly 2 feet wide, almost 9 inches thick. It holds the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, historical works, medical texts, local chronicles. But one page made its legend, a full-page illustration in vivid color, the devil himself, a crowned, green-skinned figure, alone in a white field, claws. A forked tongue, an expression of vacant menace, that image gave the book its nickname. It spawned the tale that's clung to it for centuries. The legend says a monk was condemned to be walled up alive for breaking his vows. He promised to create a book that would glorify the monastery forever. To finish this impossible task in a single night, he made a pact. He sold his soul to the devil for the help to complete it. That's the folklore, a story of supernatural intervention, explaining something that felt, even then, superhuman. But the real anomaly isn't in the myth, it's in the parchment. Modern analysis of the Codex Gigas reveals something just as staggering, but grounded in physical fact. The consistency, the handwriting, the ink, the style across all 920 pages, it's nearly uniform. Paleographers have studied it. Their conclusion is this monumental work was almost certainly written by one person. One scribe, one hand moving across the vellum. For an estimated 20 years, think of that, not one night but 2 decades. A single individual dedicating the prime of his life to this one physical object. The mental focus is almost inconceivable. To copy such a vast amount of text without the fatal errors that would require scraping away the precious vellum. To maintain the same precise formal script day after day, year after year, the physical endurance is its own marvel, preparing the ink, ruling the lines. The careful, deliberate motion of the pen, the wear on the eyes, the hands, the back, this was not a rushed job. It was a lifetime's devotion, made manifest in ink and animal skin. This transforms the book from a spooky relic into a profound human artifact. The devil on the page is just a drawing. The true force behind the Codex Gigas was a monumental act of human will. It challenges our modern sense of attention, our fragmented purpose. In an age of distraction, the idea of such singular, sustained focus feels alien. Almost anomalous. What drove him? We don't know his name. Was it penitence, a deep, personal atonement for some real or imagined failing? Was it an act of supreme piety, a desire to create the ultimate devotional object? Or was it simply the assigned work of a scribe in a remote monastery? A scribe who approached his duty with a level of skill and consistency that bordered on the obsessive. The book itself offers no confession, only the relentless, even flow of its letters. The Codex Gigas stands as an anomaly of capability. It defies our assumptions about the limits of individual endurance in the medieval world. It is a quiet, powerful rebuttal to the legend that birthed its fame. No demon was needed to write this book, only a man, his faith, his discipline, and a formidable portion of his life. In its sheer physical presence, it asks us what we are capable of when our focus is absolute. When we choose to write our story not in a night of desperate magic, but in the slow, steady accumulation of 20 years of days. It is a testament not to the supernatural, but to the astonishing potential of a human mind and hand, working in concert with time. It's a single sheet of linen, roughly 14 feet long, and on it there's this faint sepia-toned imprint, the front and back of a man who appears to have suffered the trauma of crucifixion. For millions of people, it's a sacred object. They venerate it as the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ. For scientists, it's maybe the most debated artifact in human history. It sits at this intersection, where faith and history and empirical science all meet, and none of them can offer a final answer. The central mystery is the image. It's not a painting, there are no pigments, no brushstrokes. It's a superficial discoloration, only on the very topmost fibers of the linen, and the image is a perfect negative. When it was photographed in 1898, the negative plate revealed a positive portrait, a face with serene dignity, and wounds that match the biblical accounts. A crown of thorns, a lance wound to the side, scourge marks across the back. The image also has three-dimensional information encoded in it. When you analyze it with imaging software, the variations in intensity translate into a three-dimensional relief of a body. That's something no known painting or artistic technique from any era can do. How was it done? Radiation, a chemical reaction from a body, a burst of energy. No proposed scientific model has successfully reproduced all of its characteristics on ancient linen. The method is still unexplained. Then there was the radiocarbon dating. In 1988, with permission from the Vatican, small samples from a corner of the shroud went to 3 independent labs. Their results were unanimous. The linen dated to between 1260 and 1390 AD. The medieval period, to many, that was conclusive proof. The shroud was a clever medieval forgery. Case closed, but the story didn't end. Critics raised questions almost immediately. They pointed to the shroud's known history. In 1532, it survived a devastating fire in Chambéry, France. The cloth was partially melted by silver. It was doused with water to save it. Could that event have contaminated the carbon signature? Could the heat, or the newer carbon from the fire, or microbial growth from the water, have skewed the results to a more recent date? Some researchers also point to the sample location itself. They argue the corner tested was a handled, repaired area. It might not represent the main cloth. Other evidence pulls in a different direction. Studies of pollen grains and plant images on the shroud suggest an origin near Jerusalem. The weave of the linen is a 3-to-1 herringbone twill. That's consistent with fabrics from the Dead Sea region around the 1st century. Forensic pathology notes the blood stains are composed of real hemoglobin. They show a precise forensic pattern. A medieval artist would have needed modern knowledge to fabricate that. Each of these points is contested, but together they create a persistent counter-narrative. One that suggests the carbon dating might not be the final word. So what are we left with? An object that defies easy categorization. If it's a medieval creation, it's an artifact of staggering, anomalous ingenuity. We still can't fathom how it was made. The artist would have needed knowledge of photography, negative imaging, anatomy, forensic blood patterns, and 3-dimensional encoding. Centuries before any of those concepts existed, that in itself would be a historical miracle. If the shroud is authentic to the 1st century, then it represents a physical mystery of a profound nature. A silent witness to a moment that shaped the world. The Shroud of Turin is more than a relic or a forgery. It's a mirror. It reflects the limits of our tools when confronting the deep past. Radiocarbon dating, for all its power, relies on assumptions about preservation and contamination. Our science is powerful, but it's not infallible when applied to a unique, tortured history like this cloth. The shroud embodies the ultimate challenge of historical inquiry. How do we weigh contradictory evidence? When does a scientific datum overrule a constellation of other, more ambiguous clues? And where does the space for mystery remain when our desire for an answer is so strong? It doesn't ask for belief, it asks for humility. It asks us to acknowledge that some objects may forever stand at the crossroads. Silent, holding their secret in the faint, enduring lines of woven flax. You look at these pieces from the Baltic Sea to the jungles of Ecuador, and when you step back, they form a kind of constellation. The story is in the patterns, not in one single artifact, but in the echoes between them. A theme that keeps coming up of lost precision. Engineering that seems to leap ahead of its time and then just vanishes. The Antikythera Mechanism and Puma Punku, they're separated by an ocean, but they both speak to a mastery of materials and mathematics that the historical record it struggles to contain. Then there's this other whisper about energy and motion. The Baghdad Battery, the Dendera reliefs, whether they're literal or symbolic, they point to an ancient fascination with invisible forces. The Saqqara Bird, the Nazca Lines, they suggest a deep, observational understanding of principles we associate with flight, with aerodynamics. These aren't just random, isolated things. They're like fragments of a shared language, a language of applied knowledge that pops up in different cultures and then gets forgotten. The geographical clues are just as compelling. The Maine Penny, the Tecaxic Head, the Piri Reis Map, they all hint at a world that was more connected, or at least more occasionally traversed than our maps of isolation allow. They suggest oceans weren't absolute walls. They were challenging highways crossed by the bold or the lost or the unlucky, leaving behind these faint material traces. And then, most profoundly, there are the chronological outliers, the London Hammer, the Kingoodie Hammer, the Aiud Wedge, objects that place human-like craftsmanship in geological epochs where it simply should not exist. They don't just challenge a date, they challenge the entire linear narrative of human progress. They whisper of deep time. They whisper of the possibility that the story of intelligence on this planet might be one of flickers in the dark. Not a single, steady flame. Taken together, these patterns suggest our mainstream timeline. It isn't so much wrong as it is incomplete. It's a simplified sketch, drawn with the boldest lines we can verify. But history, like a forest, is made of details, the undergrowth, the fallen logs, the cycles of growth and decay that happen out of sight. These anomalies are those details. They're the evidence of chapters that were torn out of the book, pages lost to fire or flood, or the slow erosion of collective memory. So maybe human history isn't a straight, ascending line. Maybe it's more like a spiral or a series of waves. Societies rise to peaks of knowledge and capability. They build, they map, they understand their world in profound ways. And then disaster strikes, a climate shift like the one that drowned Yonaguni, a social collapse like the one that may have halted work at Göbekli Tepe. A pandemic, a famine, a war, the library burns, the artisans die without passing on their secrets. The specialized knowledge fades into myth and then into silence. A dark age descends. The survivors rebuild, but they start from a lower baseline. They tell stories of a golden age, of gods and giants who moved mountains. They find strange objects in the ground, tools they can no longer replicate, and they repurpose them as sacred relics, or they just puzzle over them as curiosities. Centuries later, a new peak is reached. The battery, the gear, the flying machine are reinvented. We call it a discovery when it might be a rediscovery. This perspective doesn't ask us to throw out science or archaeology. On the contrary, it asks us to apply those tools with more humility, with a wider curiosity. It asks us to listen more carefully to the data that doesn't fit, to treat anomalies not as nuisances to be explained away, but as the most important clues we have. They are the cracks in the official story, and as the saying goes, that's where the light gets in. This view of history, it's not one of despair, it's one of profound possibility. It means our current civilization, for all its dazzling technology, might not be the first to gaze at the stars and chart their courses. It means the drive to understand, to build, to reach beyond our limits, that's a deeply ancient part of us. It connects the carver of the Saqqara Bird to the designer of the modern jet. It connects the astronomer who aligned the Great Pyramid to the physicist probing the cosmos. Our story becomes richer, more resilient. It's no longer a fragile, single thread. It's a tapestry woven from many threads, some broken, some faded, but all part of the same grand human endeavor. The anomalies aren't errors in the tapestry. They're the glimpses of the other side of the weave, hints of a pattern vaster and more intricate than we ever imagined. And that realization, it changes everything. It transforms our past from a settled fact into an open question, and our future into an invitation to remember what we may have once known. We have these 30 fragments, stone, metal, parchment, and they leave you with something, a quiet realization. The landscape is richer than any textbook. More mysterious, the Antikythera device with its gears, the submerged shapes off Yonaguni. These things puzzle us, but they do more than that. They call into question the story we know. The neat line from simple to complex, from ignorance to knowledge, that story starts to look like a sketch, an outline, because the reality was more intricate. More cyclical, more interesting. These anomalies aren't mistakes, they are the record itself, speaking in a dialect we're still learning. History isn't a closed book, it's an ongoing investigation, a collaborative puzzle. A single new piece can change the picture. A coin in Maine, a head in Mexico. A hammer in stone, it can QUIETLY Chinese letter, everything. This isn't about discarding science, it's about honoring its spirit, the relentless pursuit of truth. Wherever the evidence leads, skepticism is our compass. It protects us, but its partner has to be open-minded inquiry, the courage to follow a clue into the unknown. So what do we do with these contradictions, these whispers? We listen. We let them expand what's possible. They invite us to keep questioning, to keep digging. In the earth and in the archives, to remain awed, not by easy answers, but by the vast, untold story behind us, a story that might include forgotten peaks. Connections across oceans we thought were empty, cycles of loss and rediscovery. Our civilization is part of a much longer conversation. The greatest lesson isn't proving a theory right or wrong. It's a humbling understanding. The past holds secrets we haven't even imagined. Our map still has blank spaces, and in those spaces wonder lives.